When we think of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the first thing that usually comes to mind is that he was the chief architect of India's constitution. And of course, that's absolutely true. But it's really only one part of a much bigger, much more radical story. So today we're going to go beyond the textbook to really get to the core of his life's work. A relentless, intellectual war against a system he saw as the single greatest obstacle to human dignity. Okay, let's start with this quote because it is the key to everything. The statement unlocks his entire philosophy. He was saying, look, every society has a division of labor, people doing different jobs. That's normal. The problem with caste, he argued, is that it's an unnatural division of laborers into watertight compartments. It doesn't just divide the work, it divides the workers themselves, grading them, locking them into a hierarchy from birth, and making it impossible for them to unite. And for Ambedkar, this wasn't just some random prejudice that popped up over time. No, he diagnosed caste as a meticulously designed social system, one that was sanctioned and held up by religious texts. It was a system built from the ground up on a foundation of inequality, and he was determined to expose it and dismantle it piece by piece. At the very heart of this system is something called Chaturvarnya. Now, Ambedkar argued this was much more than just a social structure. He called it a form of graded inequality. Think of it like a ladder. As you move down from Brahmin to Shudra, your rights and privileges get smaller and smaller, while your disabilities and duties get bigger and bigger. It's a vertical hierarchy where your place is fixed, not by your talent, but by the family you were born into. So you have to ask, how do you maintain a rigid system like this for centuries? Well, Ambedkar pointed to what he called singular uxorial customs, and these were practices that primarily targeted women. Things like sati, forcing widows to never remarry, and child marriage. These weren't just random traditions. He argued they were actually social mechanisms designed to control surplus men and women within a caste to prevent any intermarriage. It was all about preserving so-called caste purity. And this is where you see the brutal, real-world consequences of these ideas. For the millions of people who were considered outside this fourfold system, the untouchables, daily life was just a series of ritual humiliations. In some places, they were forced to carry brooms to literally sweep away their polluting footsteps or hang pots around their necks to spit in so it wouldn't contaminate the ground. This was more than just segregation. It was a constant psychological warfare to enforce their status. Okay, so when you're faced with a system that's so deeply embedded in society, what do? Ambedkar knew that just having polite debates wasn't going to cut it. He launched a multi-front war, and he started by going right after the religious codes and social norms that were used to justify the whole thing. His logic was just so direct and symbolic. In 1927, he led a public burning of the Manusmriti, an ancient text that lays out the rules of the caste hierarchy. For him, this wasn't about disrespecting religion, it was about liberation. It was like burning a legal document that sanctions slavery. He was attacking the very ideological source of the oppression.
But he also used nonviolent protest. The Kalaram Temple Satyagraha was this grueling, 6-year peaceful struggle just for the basic right of untouchables to enter a Hindu temple. And this wasn't just about walking into a building. It was a direct challenge to the idea of pollution and a powerful statement about civic and human rights.
All right, let's shift gears to the political front, because this is where things get really interesting. Ambedkar knew that social protests were not enough. If you really want to change things, you need political power. For him, the fight for equality had to be waged in the halls of government, not just on the streets. And this led to one of the most significant ideological clashes of the entire independence era. On one side, you had Ambedkar. He demanded separate electorates, a system where untouchables would vote only for their own candidates. Why? Because he believed it was the only way to make sure their representatives were actually accountable to them, and not to the caste Hindu majority. On the other side, you had Gandhi. He saw this as a move that would literally vivisect and disrupt Hinduism forever. The standoff came to a head with the Pune Pact. To stop separate electorates from happening, Gandhi began a fast unto death. The pressure on Ambedkar was immense. The whole country believed Gandhi's life was in his hands. He was basically forced to compromise, accepting a system of reserved seats, but within a joint electorate. It was a decision he felt was made under coercion, and he had deep fears that it just wouldn't work. And this data from the elections a few years later shows you exactly why he was so worried. Look at these numbers. In constituencies with these new reserve seats, the scheduled caste voters were just massively outnumbered. Take Mirzapur district. The ratio was almost 11-1. So what does that mean? It means a candidate running for a reserved seat had to win over the caste Hindu majority. Their vote was the one that mattered, which effectively silenced the very community the seat was supposed to represent. But, despite these political setbacks, Ambedkar's greatest constructive role was actually still to come. As the chairman of the drafting committee for India's constitution, he finally had the chance to build safeguards for equality right into the legal DNA of the new nation. And he fought tenaciously for these safeguards. He wasn't just talking about abstract rights. He demanded concrete, real-world mechanisms for sharing power. This meant everything from reserved seats and jobs all the way up to ensuring representation in the highest levels of government, the cabinets, to make sure the community's interests could never be ignored. And his vision of equality was expansive. It went way beyond just caste. Through something called the Hindu Code Bill, he pushed for radical reforms for women's rights, things like the right to divorce and the right to inherit property. He really saw the law as a powerful tool for social revolution, a way to challenge centuries of patriarchal tradition and push the whole nation forward. So here's the crucial point. After decades of fighting, on the social front, the political front, the legal front, after trying every possible way to reform the system from within, Ambedkar arrived at a profound and incredibly radical conclusion. He came to believe that caste wasn't a bug in the system, it was the system. It wasn't some unfortunate distortion of Hinduism, it was its core feature, sanctioned by its most sacred texts. And if that was true, he concluded, then real liberation, real equality, it was impossible as long as you remained inside that system. The only path forward was a complete and total exit. Now, his choice to convert wasn't random at all. It was deeply philosophical. He chose Buddhism because of its rational and egalitarian principles. He drew this sharp contrast between the idea of salvation, where a soul is saved by a prophet, and the Buddhist concept of nibbana. Nibbana, he explained, is about self-mastery, controlling one's own passions. It's a state achieved by man, for man, with no divine intervention required. And this whole intellectual journey culminated in a truly historic, revolutionary act. In Nagpur, in 1956, just a few weeks before he died, he led nearly 400,000 of his followers in a mass conversion to Buddhism. It was the largest event of its kind in the 20th century. Just think about that. For Ambedkar, this wasn't just about switching one faith for another. It was about adopting a whole new moral order. He defined Dhamma as morality itself, a system built on the principles of liberty, equality, fraternity, and maybe most importantly, Maitri, which is this idea of universal friendship and compassion for every living being. And that brings us to our final provocative thought. Dr. Ambedkar's final act really frames his entire life struggle. And it leaves us with this powerful question about the limits of law, the long search for human dignity, and what it really truly takes to annihilate caste.